Northport Village, Long Island, New York, June 19, 1984. Richard Kasso, James Toriano, Gary Lowers, and Albert Cronones were hanging out in a nearby woods. There, Gary Lowers was stabbed to death, with his eyes cut out. His clothes were torn and thrown in the nearby fire that they had just made. While Gary Lowers lay dead, James Toriano and Richie Kasso were charged with murder a few weeks later. Richard Kasso hanged himself at Suffolk County Correctional Facility, being held. Problem is, this sheriff that made that statement is a crooked sheriff, under multiple investigations of brutality and violence towards the Riverhead Correctional Facility inmates. On top of that, a majority of the witnesses that came forward and said that they've seen the body of Gary Lowers within the weeks after his death were no longer able to take the stand against Richard Kasso, James Toriano, or Albert Cronones. James Toriano and Albert Cronones were put on trial. Ricky Kasso hanged himself in jail, mind you. None of these witnesses were able to take the stand because many of these witnesses who've seen the body of Gary Lowers came forward to Rolling Stone magazine. Kids in the Dark was the article that was published about the Acid King Ricky Kasso murder. Due to their take in the Rolling Stone magazine article, none of these witnesses were able to go to trial and actually testify on their behalf of what they seen. Political This has dug even further into the case of Gary Lowers. Warning, what you're about to see and hear will shock you. It will disgust you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Acid King Ricky Kasso, Part 4. More than meets the eye.
I had satanic rituals around. That wasn't true.
July 5th, 1984. Both Richard Kasso and James Toriano were apprehended for the murder of Gary Lowers. While in questioning, Detective Walter Walkenthine of the Suffolk County Police Department states that both Richard Kasso and James Toriano had waived their rights to a lawyer and had voluntarily given confession to investigators. Problem: both James Toriano and Richard Kasso were minors, which means all their interrogation and interviews were null and void and illegal to begin with at the hands of Detective Walter Walkenthine. James Toriano and Richard Kasso were then transferred to the Riverhead Correctional Facility, held on the murder of Gary Lowers. It was there that Richard Kasso hanged himself. The local night watch walked past Richard's cell at 12:30 a.m. in the morning. There, Richard Kasso was sound asleep. When he made his second round, about 1 a.m., Richard Kasso was in his cell, hanged. Riverhead Correctional Facility, for decades, has been riddled with abuse and abandonment, including one, Mr. John P. Finnerty. In 1983, January, Correction Officer Ramos testified. Several white officers dressed as an Hispanic inmate in a straw hat, a sheet, and a sign that read a racial slur and referred to him as Ramos' son. Ramos stated in the report. The Independent went as far as saying, "Our jail infrastructure consolidates racial injustice throughout Suffolk County." That's the name of the article they had. In the article, it reads that it's time to talk about closing Riverhead Jail as the first step in addressing the county's looming $1 billion plus deficit and envisioning a more equitable Long Island. 2012, Suffolk County faced litigation from the New York Civil Liberties Union. In another article, it reads Suffolk County correction officers punched, kicked, and stomped an inmate at the Riverhead Jail who later died from his injuries. According to a federal wrongful death lawsuit filed last month by the sister of the dead man. The lawsuit filed in centralized federal court on July 6th by Valerie Wright, Queens, says Wright's brother Andre Seabrook was assaulted in June 2015 by several unidentified sheriff's officers following a search of his cell at the Riverhead Correctional Facility. Seabrook was paralyzed from the waist down as a result of the attack and died about 6 weeks later. Another article about Scott Yarwood, 34 years old of Wantagh, died December 3rd at Stony Brook University. This article is from the Riverhead News Review. It states Mr. Yarwood was found about 2:15 p.m. on November 29th and was initially transported to Conic Bay Medical Center by ambulance volunteers. The Conic Bay Medical Center is actually the Riverhead Hospital where Richard Kasso was taken and died. Mr. Yarwood was taken there and died. Let me rephrase that. He was later transferred to Stony Brook where he died. In another report, Sergeant Ronald Brooks, the spokesperson for the jail, said that officers performed CPR and mouth-to-mouth techniques and then rushed Mr. Kasso to Central Suffolk Hospital in Riverhead, where he was pronounced dead at 2:17 a.m. So 1 hour and 17 minutes later is when Richard Kasso was pronounced dead, when the hospital was just minutes away. Mr. Toriano, who was also alone in his cell, was immediately placed under around-the-clock observation. The man who answered the telephone at the home of Mr. Kasso's family in Northport said the family would have no comments. Sheriff Finnerty said both were processed through an inmate classification system and for their own protection were assigned to individual cells in the maximum security jail, which was described yesterday as overcrowded with 800 prisoners in spaces designed for about 600 prisoners. He exhibited no undue stress and was treated as any other inmate. Sheriff Finnerty claims that in a jail that's only designed for 600 people was overcrowded by an extra 200 people, and Mr. Kasso and Mr. Toriano made it to their very own cells with nobody else. In a case entitled Butler vs. Suffolk County, United States District Court, Eastern District of New York, April 5th, 2012. Mac Butler, 37 years old, was detained at the Suffolk County Correctional Facility, located in Riverhead, New York. He's been, at the time, detained since January 2011 and is still awaiting trial. At all times, while detained at the Suffolk County Correctional Facility, Mr. Butler claims to have been exposed to the conditions described in the complaint. Nature of action. The men detained in the Suffolk County Correctional Facility, the majority of whom have not been convicted of any crime, are subjected to inhumane conditions that pose unreasonable and substantial risks to their health. The men are forced to live in overcrowded conditions, amidst filth, overflowing sewage, and pervasive mold, rust, and vermin. Fifth Circuit once noted, quote, no one in civilized society should be forced to live under conditions that force exposure to another person's bodily waste. To this day, that statement about bodily waste at the Riverhead Correctional Facility still holds true. Mr. Paul Alford, 21. This is the same case. Grew up in Suffolk County, Bayshore, New York. Carpenter and electrical wire. Excuse me. He was detained in that facility since September of 2011. Mr. Alver is currently serving a sentence for a non-violent crime. At all times while detained in the Suffolk County Correctional Facility, Mr. Alver has been exposed to the conditions described in the complaint. Mr. Kevin King, 27 years old. He was also detained at the Suffolk County Correctional Facility in Riverhead. While he was there, Mr. Ricky Lynch, 49 years old, spent much of his life in Suffolk County in Coram, New York, and ran a cleaning business prior to his incarceration in Suffolk County Correctional Facility. Mr. Lynch was actually detained in Yaphank from July 2010 to November 2010, then to Riverhead, November 2010 to October 2011. Mr. Lynch was convicted in October 2011 of a non-violent crime. At all times, while detained in the Suffolk County Correctional Facility, Mr. Lynch was exposed to conditions described in the complaint. Mr. Clyde Lofton, 26 years old. The New Yorker has even came out and posted an article stating the New York Civil Liberties Union seizing on the show's use of the Riverhead Correctional Facility launched a campaign called Humanity is the New Black, or hashtag Humanity is New Black, to protest conditions at Riverhead and at Yaphank, another Suffolk County jail. Quote, I think the NYCLU campaign is great, Piper Kerman. Moving further into the New Yorker article, what if the problem in the bathroom weren't the lack of privacy, but rather that every time someone flushed, her waste would surface in a neighboring stall? Those are some of the more than 90 complaints filed by inmates at the correctional facility in Suffolk County, where Orange is the New Black has filmed their second season. People versus James Toriano. According to Detective John F. Gallagher, at least 4 teenagers and possibly other members of the cult witnessed the slaying in which Mr. Kasso plunged a knife 17 times into the head, neck, and chest of the victim. The problem with that statement is, according to Northport Village Police, there was no cult. According to those who knew Richard Kasso and James Toriano, there was no cult. According to the police statement, after the fact, to the news and to the media and to the public, there were only 4 teenagers in total, not 5. This article was posted by the New York Times. Why was there a confliction of truth? Kids in the Dark, Rolling Stone magazine, November 22nd, 1984. This is the controversial article. The controversial article contained numerous eyewitnesses before and after the murder of Gary Lowers, some of which knew both James Toriano and Gary Lauers, some of which knew all three. These controversial articles were published in the Rolling Stone magazine in the article known Kids in the Dark. Once again, November 22nd, 1984. Suffolk County attempted to get these individuals in this article on the stand for the trial of James Soriano. Unfortunately, due to the Shield Law, it strictly protects Civil Rights Law 79-8, commonly referred to as the Shield Law. The subpoenas should be squashed. Every subpoena was squashed. Nobody actually took the stand that was involved in this article. The Shield Law provides that a news reporter shall not be held in contempt by any court for refusing or failing to disclose any news or the source of any such news coming into his possession in the course of gathering or obtaining news for publication or to be published in a newspaper, magazine, or for broadcast by radio or television transmission station or network. None of these individuals were able to make it to trial. Richard Kasso and James Soriano both signed statements as minors, which is illegal. The detective that interrogated both men said they waived their rights to a lawyer, which is illegal. They were both minors. Richard Kasso then goes to the correctional facility in Riverhead, New York, where he's pronounced dead via hanging. This is according to a corrupt sheriff who has been known and under investigation several times for being violent. This is coming from the Suffolk County Correctional Facility, who still to this day is under investigation for their brutality. James Soriano. Everybody has a right to a fair trial. When all the evidence is not brought forward, whether guilty nor not guilty, whether it works in the favor of the suspect or the victim, a fair trial is a fair trial. James Soriano, although he was found not guilty, did not have a fair trial due to the Rolling Stone magazine refusal to cooperate in this case. Only one question stands. What really happened with Gary Lauers? Tune in for part 5. Acid King Ricky Kasso. Political Depth.